When Ethan Hayes brought a shivering stray dog into his barn during Montana's deadliest blizzard in decades, he never imagined Secret Service agents would surround his property within a week, or that his simple act of kindness would uncover a specialized canine operative thought to have vanished during a classified mission that even his former military commanders refused to acknowledge. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're fascinated by incredible animal stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because next week I'll be sharing the remarkable tale of a dolphin that led scientists to an underwater discovery that's challenging everything we know about marine intelligence. The January wind howled across the snow-covered plains of Clearwater County as Ethan Hayes secured the last of his livestock in the barn. At 58, the deep lines etched around his eyes told the story of 3 decades of military service, followed by 7 years working his late father's struggling cattle ranch, a life marked by duty, sacrifice, and quiet resilience. That should hold. Until this blizzard passes, he muttered to himself, tightening the reinforced barn door against winds that meteorologists were calling the leading edge of a record-breaking storm system. His calloused hands, equally comfortable with military-grade weapons as they were with farm equipment, worked methodically through their evening routine. The small transistor radio in the corner of the barn crackled with the latest emergency broadcast, just expecting up to 30 inches of snowfall with wind gusts reaching 60 miles per hour. This is a life-threatening situation. All residents are advised to shelter in place immediately. Repeat, do not attempt travel under any circumstances. Ethan switched off the radio with a grimace. 7 years after trading his uniform for overalls, he still maintained the methodical preparedness of his military training. The generator was fueled, 3 weeks of provisions were stocked, and the satellite phone was charged in case the landlines went down. Unlike some of his neighbors who'd been caught off guard by the sudden intensification of the storm, Ethan's ranch was as ready as any place could be for what was coming. The 10-acre Hayes homestead sat isolated at the end of a long country road, bordered by national forest on 2 sides. The nearest neighbor was 4 miles away, a distance that could become impassable for weeks during Montana's harshest winter storms. The white 2-story farmhouse that Ethan's grandfather had built in 1952 stood in stark contrast to the modern solar panels and satellite dish he had installed upon inheriting the property. The marriage of traditional craftsmanship and practical innovation reflected Ethan himself, a man with deep respect for the past, but clear-eyed about the requirements of the present. Inside his kitchen, the worn oak table was covered with weather, maps, and livestock rotation plans. A single photo stood on the windowsill, Ethan in desert camouflage, standing beside 3 other soldiers and a military working dog, a Belgian Malinois whose alert posture matched that of the men around her. The frame contained the only visible evidence of his 29 years in specialized units that he never discussed, even with the few friends he'd made since returning to his hometown. The meteorologists had predicted the storm wouldn't hit full force until midnight, but already at 7 p.m., the snow was coming down in blinding sheets, accumulating faster than Ethan had seen in years. Through the kitchen window, the security lights illuminated a world quickly disappearing under a blanket of white. His property had essentially become an island in a growing sea of impassable terrain. "Going to be a long night," he said to the empty room, pouring himself a cup of coffee before making one final check of the perimeter before full dark. The ranch had belonged to the Hayes family for 3 generations, but the past decade had been especially challenging. Climate change had brought increasingly unpredictable weather patterns to Montana, devastating droughts, followed by catastrophic flooding that wreaked havoc on traditional cattle operations. Small family ranches like Ethan's were selling out to large agricultural corporations at an alarming rate, unable to absorb the financial impact of these extreme conditions or afford the technological adaptations needed to remain viable. Ethan had returned to the family ranch after his father's unexpected death, exchanging one form of service for another. The transition from elite military operative to struggling rancher hadn't been easy. His specialized training had prepared him for almost any combat scenario, but offered little guidance for battling bank loans and failing equipment. Still, the discipline and resilience that had defined his military career served him well in this new battlefield. As he pulled on his heavy winter coat and grabbed a powerful flashlight for his final inspection, Ethan glanced at the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, a Hayes family heirloom that had kept perfect time since 1887. His great-grandfather had brought it west when he first claimed this land, a symbol of civilization in the wilderness. Now it ticked steadily, as it had through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless family crises, a reminder of continuity amid change. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, and the wind cut through his layers like icy blades. The security lights cast eerie shadows across the snow-covered yard as he made his way toward the equipment shed. His breath crystallized instantly in the frigid air. Halfway across the yard, something caused him to stop abruptly. A sound, barely perceptible beneath the howling wind. Ethan's hand instinctively moved toward his right hip, where a sidearm would have been during his deployment years. The habit persisted despite the 7 years since he'd regularly carried a weapon. He stood motionless, his senses honed by years of high-stakes operations, extending beyond ordinary awareness to identify the source of the disturbance. There it was again, a faint whimpering coming from near the old storage shed. Ethan adjusted his course, moving with the quiet efficiency that had once made him exceptional in his classified role. As he approached the shed, his flashlight beam cut through the swirling snow to reveal a dark shape huddled against the wooden structure, nearly covered by rapidly accumulating snowdrift. A dog, medium-sized and clearly exhausted, was pressed against the shed's wall, seeking minimal shelter from the merciless storm. The animal's dark fur was matted with ice, and it raised its head weakly as Ethan's light found it. Despite its obviously desperate condition, the dog maintained a certain alertness, its eyes assessing Ethan with an intelligence that seemed oddly familiar to him. "Where'd you come from, boy?" Ethan asked, his voice softening as he slowly approached the animal. There were no neighboring farms close enough for a dog to have wandered from, especially in these conditions. The nearest town was 18 miles away, an impossible journey for any animal in this blizzard. The dog made no attempt to move as Ethan drew closer, but neither did it show fear or aggression. Instead, it watched him with what seemed like calculated patience. When Ethan extended his hand, palm down in the universal gesture of non-threatening introduction, the dog's nose twitched slightly, taking in his scent. After a moment's consideration, it gave his fingers a brief lick. "Can't leave you out here," Ethan said, noting how the animal's ribs showed through its coat and the way it held one paw slightly raised, suggesting an injury. "Let's get you inside before we both freeze solid." As Ethan gently gathered the dog into his arms, he was struck by how little the animal resisted. Despite its weakened state, he could feel the solid muscle mass beneath its wet fur. This was no ordinary stray, and around its neck, barely visible beneath the matted fur, was what appeared to be a worn leather collar without tags or identification. Little did Ethan know as he carried the shivering animal toward his barn that this seemingly simple act of mercy would connect him to a covert operation he thought he'd left behind forever, and within days would bring forces to his isolated ranch that he never expected to encounter again. The blizzard that descended upon Montana's rural counties that January night was merely the latest manifestation of a changing world that had been gradually reshaping the American heartland for decades. Family ranches that had once formed the backbone of communities across the state were vanishing at an alarming rate, victims of economic pressures, climate volatility, and the relentless consolidation of agricultural land under corporate ownership. Ethan had carried the exhausted dog into the barn's tack room, where a small wood stove kept the space warm enough for the animal's immediate recovery. As he gently toweled the creature dry, the ranch owner's experienced hands assessed its condition with practiced efficiency. "You're dehydrated, probably haven't eaten in days," he murmured, noting the dog's prominent ribs beneath the surprisingly muscular frame. "But you've been trained by someone who knew what they were doing." The animal's behavior confirmed Ethan's assessment. Despite its weakened state, the dog responded to basic hand signals with immediate comprehension, accepting water and food with disciplined restraint rather than desperate gulping. Most telling was its alertness. Even in exhaustion, its eyes tracked Ethan's movements with intelligent assessment, a characteristic he recognized from his years working with specialized military canines. When Ethan's satellite phone rang unexpectedly, the dog's head snapped toward the sound with a level of focused attention that went beyond ordinary canine awareness. The caller ID showed restricted, a designation Ethan hadn't seen since leaving his former life behind. "Hayes," he answered, his voice automatically shifting to the clipped professional tone of his military years. "Turn on your emergency broadcast." "Good channel," said a male voice without introduction. "Montana State Police just issued evacuation orders for Riverside County due to dam concerns." The line went dead before Ethan could respond. The call itself was unremarkable. Emergency notifications weren't unusual during extreme weather events. But something about the timing and delivery triggered Ethan's finely tuned instincts. The caller had used a voice modulation device, the kind employed when operational security was paramount, not when delivering routine weather updates. As Ethan switched on the emergency broadcast system, the dog watched him with heightened attention, its head cocked slightly, as if processing far more than an ordinary animal should comprehend. The broadcast confirmed the evacuation order, but Clearwater County wasn't affected. Riverside was on the opposite side of the state. "Someone wanted me to turn on this channel," Ethan realized aloud. But why? The answer came moments later when the broadcast briefly experienced what most listeners would dismiss as routine transmission interference. But to Ethan's trained ear, the static contained embedded tones, a communication method he hadn't encountered since his final deployment. With Task Force Sigma, a joint agency unit so classified that most military leadership remained unaware of its existence. Task Force Sigma had pioneered integrated human-canine operations that went far beyond conventional military working dog protocols. The program had achieved breakthrough advances in canine cognitive enhancement and specialized training before being officially terminated after a mission gone wrong in 2017. At least, that was the official story provided to the operatives who were subsequently reassigned. Ethan glanced at the dog, who was now sitting at full attention, its gaze fixed on him with unmistakable recognition. "You're one of them, aren't you?" he whispered. "Ghost program, 5th generation enhanced." The animal's ears pricked forward at the phrase "ghost program," and it responded with a subtle head movement that translated into an unmistakable affirmative to anyone familiar with the specialized communication protocols developed for the enhanced canines. "Well, I'll be damned," Ethan muttered, running a hand over his weathered face. Outside, the blizzard had intensified to whiteout conditions, with wind gusts rattling the barn's sturdy frame. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero, creating conditions that would be lethal to anyone caught unprepared. Through the small window, Ethan could barely make out the lights of his own farmhouse 50 yards away. The isolation that had once provided him comfort now took on a different quality: strategic vulnerability. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the weather was unseasonably mild for January as Deputy Director Catherine Westbrook strode through the underground corridor connecting the Executive Office building to a secure facility known officially as Site 9. Her security clearance, among the highest in the government, barely covered her authorized access to this particular location, a fact that made her current assignment all the more unusual. "Ma'am, the preliminary confirmation just came through," reported a young analyst who fell into step beside her. "RFID signature matches. It's Artemis, designation K9 Alpha 7. Westbrook maintained her brisk pace, betraying no emotion despite the news that an asset declared irretrievably lost 3 years earlier had somehow resurfaced during a routine weather pattern scan of remote areas. "Reliability quotient?" she asked sharply. 96%, ma'am. The enhanced microchip's quantum encryption signature is unique. It's definitely Artemis. Location status? Isolated ranch in Clearwater County, Montana. Owner is the analyst hesitated, double-checking his tablet. Former Army Special Forces, transitioned to... Wait, that can't be right. Westbrook stopped abruptly, fixing the analyst with a penetrating stare. "Finish your sentence, Daniels." "The property owner appears to be former Master Sergeant Ethan Hayes, ma'am. Task Force Sigma, Handler Team Alpha. He was Artemis's original trainer before being reassigned after the Kazakhstan incident." Westbrook's carefully controlled expression flickered briefly. "That's not possible. That would be..." "An astronomical coincidence," Daniels completed, "or something else entirely." The implications hung in the air between them. Artemis had vanished during a classified operation targeting a domestic terrorist cell with foreign connections. The enhanced canine had been carrying embedded intelligence deemed critical to national security, data believed lost when the animal disappeared during the operation's chaotic conclusion. That Artemis would somehow find her way to her original handler after 3 years, across thousands of miles of terrain, during a historic blizzard, stretched coincidence beyond reasonable limits. "Get me Secretary Martinez immediately," Westbrook ordered, "and activate the Montana Rapid Response Team. Full protocol, no local involvement." As Daniels hurried to comply, Westbrook entered her biometric credentials into the secure terminal. The file that appeared was heavily redacted even at her clearance level, but certain details remained accessible. Project Artemis had created a limited number of enhanced canines with unprecedented cognitive abilities, memory capacity, and operational independence. The program had advanced beyond its original parameters, ultimately achieving results that even its creators had found disturbing, including capabilities that remained classified above Westbrook's considerable access level. What was abundantly clear, however, was that Artemis wasn't simply a trained military canine. She was a national security asset carrying intelligence that multiple foreign agencies would kill to acquire, if they knew she existed at all. Back in Montana, oblivious to the machinery now grinding into motion in Washington, Ethan had brought the dog, Artemis, though he didn't yet know her operational designation, into his farmhouse as the storm reached its peak intensity. The security system he'd installed upon returning to civilian life was modest by military standards, but substantial for a rural property, including motion sensors, cellular-linked cameras, and reinforced entry points. Tonight, he activated protocols he hadn't used since moving back to the ranch. As he worked, Artemis watched with evident recognition, occasionally moving to specific locations around the house, as if performing a security sweep of her own. The behavior confirmed what Ethan had already suspected. This was no ordinary military working dog, but something far more advanced. The enhanced canines of Task Force Sigma had demonstrated cognitive abilities approaching human problem-solving in specific domains, along with memory and sensory capabilities that had revolutionized joint operations. Ethan's involvement with the program had ended abruptly after a classified mission in Kazakhstan went catastrophically wrong. The official record stated that enhanced assets had performed unpredictably, necessitating immediate program termination. Ethan and other handlers had been reassigned and sworn to absolute secrecy, their access to the enhanced canines permanently revoked. Yet, here was an enhanced canine, possibly one he had helped train, appearing at his isolated ranch during a historic blizzard, years after the program's supposed termination. And someone had gone to considerable trouble to alert him through secure channels that would only be recognized by someone with his specific background. As midnight approached and the blizzard reached its full fury, Ethan made a decision. From beneath the floorboards of his bedroom closet, he retrieved a sealed case he'd hoped never to open again, containing secure communication equipment, identification documents under various names, and weapons that didn't officially exist. The protocols for handlers who encountered compromised enhanced assets were explicitly clear, regardless of how many years had passed since their active service. Artemis observed his preparations with evident approval, her intelligent eyes following each practiced movement. When Ethan finally settled into his chair by the fire, the specialized rifle within arm's reach, the dog positioned herself near the front window, a tactical position offering optimal observational advantage while remaining concealed from outside. "A view. I don't know what happened to you or how you found me," Ethan told the animal quietly, "but I have a feeling we're both going to have visitors soon, and they won't all be coming to help. Artemis turned her gaze from the window momentarily, meeting his eyes with an almost human comprehension, before returning to her vigilant watch. Outside, the howling storm created a temporary barrier against whatever forces were now converging on the isolated Montana ranch, but Ethan knew from bitter experience that such reprieves were always temporary. What he couldn't know was that in secure facilities across Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, analysts were already tracking weather patterns over Montana with unprecedented interest, calculating exactly when the storm would clear enough for their respective teams to reach the isolated property and the extraordinary asset that had unexpectedly resurfaced after being presumed lost forever. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness that only follows extreme weather events. The blizzard had finally exhausted itself after raging through the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape buried under nearly 3 feet of pristine snow. The sun rose over a world rendered almost unrecognizable. Fence lines had disappeared, outbuildings were half buried, and the long driveway connecting Ethan's property to the county road had vanished completely beneath mountainous drifts. Ethan stood at his kitchen window, steaming coffee in hand, surveying the altered terrain with a tactician's eye. The storm had created both advantages and vulnerabilities. The property was effectively cut off from ground approach, without specialized vehicles or snow-clearing equipment, providing temporary security through isolation. Conversely, anyone monitoring from above would have a clear view of any movement. Across the unbroken white expanse surrounding the buildings, defensive positioning improved, but mobility and concealment compromised, he muttered to himself, falling back on assessment protocols from his former life. Artemis sat beside him, her posture alert yet relaxed, having recovered remarkably after a night of proper food, water, and rest. In daylight, with her dark coat now clean and dry, Ethan could see details he'd missed the previous evening, the distinctive muscular structure and slightly larger cranial capacity that differentiated enhanced canines from their conventional counterparts. There was also a barely perceptible surgical scar behind her left ear, likely the access point for the specialized neural implants that had made Project Artemis so revolutionary and controversial. "Let's get a better look at you," Ethan said, kneeling before the dog. She submitted willingly to his examination, dark eyes watching him with that unsettling intelligence he remembered from the program. Gently parting the fur around her neck, Ethan found what he was looking for, a specialized collar that appeared ordinary to casual observation, but contained advanced technology. A small section of the leather had been crafted to hide a compartment, currently sealed with what appeared to be a biometric lock keyed to authorized handlers. "That's what they're after," he realized aloud. "You're carrying something important enough to activate emergency protocols." Artemis tilted her head slightly in what Ethan recognized as confirmation. The enhanced communication capabilities of these specialized canines had been among the program's most classified achievements, not merely responding to commands, but actively participating in two-way exchanges through a sophisticated system of subtle movements, postures, and vocalizations that approached primitive language. "Is it time-sensitive?" Ethan asked, using the hand gestures that accompanied verbal commands in the program's communication protocols. Artemis performed the canine equivalent of a nod, unmistakable to someone trained to recognize it. Ethan's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming text. The number was unfamiliar, but the message format was one he recognized from his Task Force Sigma days. "Sundown protocol activated. Sunset -7 hours. Authenticate Helix 7 Delta." The specialized terminology confirmed his suspicions. Official. Recovery operations were already underway. The Sunset -7 designation meant he had 7 hours before the primary recovery team would arrive. The authentication request was standard procedure, designed to confirm he was indeed Ethan Hayes, and not someone who had compromised his identity. Using the satellite phone's encrypted messaging system, Ethan entered the appropriate response code, followed by his personal authentication sequence. After a brief pause, confirmation arrived. "Authentication accepted. Maintain position. Assets inbound. Asset." This should have been reassuring. Official channels acknowledging his situation and dispatching authorized personnel to secure both him and the enhanced canine. Yet something felt wrong about the exchange. The authentication protocols were textbook, but the timing was rushed. Standard procedure would establish secure communications first, followed by a detailed situation assessment before determining the appropriate response. This felt hurried, almost desperate. Ethan's instincts, honed through decades of high-stakes operations, were signaling caution. He decided to perform a simple test, entering a subtle error in his follow-up message, a missing character in a location that only a genuine Task Force Sigma controller would recognize as significant. The response came quickly. "Confirm position secure. Maintain current protocol." A legitimate controller would have immediately flagged the authentication error and initiated secondary verification. Whoever was messaging him either wasn't actually from official channels or was under extreme pressure and missing critical details. "We've got problems," Ethan told Artemis, who had watched the exchange with evident understanding. "Someone wants us to stay put and wait for extraction, but they're not following proper protocols." The dog's ears pricked forward, her body language shifting subtly into what handlers had called operational readiness, a state of heightened awareness without obvious tension. She moved to the window, standing on her hind legs to look out, across the snow-covered landscape, scanning methodically as if conducting her own threat assessment. Ethan made a quick decision. Whether the approaching assets were legitimate or not, remaining passive wasn't in his nature. He needed more information, and there was only one person from his former life he still trusted completely. From his emergency kit, Ethan retrieved a specialized communication device that resembled an ordinary satellite phone, but operated on frequencies reserved for the most classified operations. He'd been authorized to maintain it after leaving active service, supposedly for emergency recall situations, though he had suspected other motives at the time. The device required both physical authentication via fingerprint and a series of coded inputs that changed according to a complex algorithm. After completing the security measures, Ethan entered the contact sequence for Colonel Maya Rivera, his former commanding officer in Task Force Sigma and the only person who had objected to the program's abrupt termination. The connection process took nearly 3 minutes, an eternity in digital communication terms, as the device established a secure tunnel through multiple encrypted relays. When the connection finally stabilized, he heard only silence on the line, followed by a single word in a familiar voice. Verify. Hayes, E. Authentication. Chimera 9 Echo 5. Ethan responded, using the emergency authentication protocol. Established years earlier. Jesus Christ, Ethan, came Rivera's voice, the professional facade momentarily dropping. Where are you? My ranch. Montana, he replied tersely. Colonel, I've got an old friend visiting. Female, dark hair, distinctive collar. Looks like she's had a rough few years. The silence that followed spoke volumes. When Rivera finally responded, her voice had regained its professional control, but carried an undertone of tension Ethan recognized from their most dangerous operations. That's impossible, she said quietly. Asset Artemis was confirmed lost during Operation Blackstone 3 years ago. Well, she's currently sitting in my living room, Colonel, and based on the communications I've received, multiple parties are very interested in her current location. Another weighted pause. What communications? Who's made contact? Received. Standard recovery protocols through official channels approximately 30 minutes ago. Authentication was correct, but follow-up procedures were non-standard. Something's off. Listen carefully, Rivera said, her voice dropping to near whisper. There is no official recovery operation. I would know. I'm still in the chain of command for all Sigma assets, active or decommissioned. Whoever contacted you is running an unauthorized operation. The implications were immediately clear to Ethan. Either a rogue element within the government was conducting off-books operations, or a foreign entity had compromised enough of their systems to convincingly mimic official protocols. Neither possibility was reassuring. What about Artemis? Ethan asked. If she wasn't on an authorized operation, where has she been for 3 years? And why would she come to me now? That's complicated, Rivera replied after a hesitation. After Kazakhstan, the program fractured. Some assets were officially decommissioned. Others were transferred to black-budget operations outside standard oversight. Artemis was among those transferred against my explicit recommendation. As Rivera spoke, Artemis had moved to Ethan's side, her attention fixed on the communication device, as if following the conversation. When Rivera mentioned Kazakhstan, the dog's ears flattened briefly, a reaction that didn't escape Ethan's notice. She remembers you, Ethan observed, and Kazakhstan. Their memory capacity was always the most remarkable aspect, Rivera acknowledged, and the most problematic for certain parties. Ethan, you need to understand, Artemis isn't just a dog, or even just an enhanced asset. By the final phase of the program, the cognitive enhancements had progressed far beyond original parameters. She remembers everything she's ever seen or heard in operational contexts, which makes her a walking intelligence repository, Ethan concluded, the pieces falling into place. That's why multiple agencies would want to recover her. She's carrying 3 years of undocumented intelligence operations in her enhanced memory. And in more concrete form as well, Rivera added. The collar contains an advanced data storage, System. If she's been operational for 3 years under covert directive, that storage would contain enough compromising intelligence to destabilize multiple agencies. What matters right now is who sent her to you. The question hung in the air as Ethan considered the implications. Enhanced canines were capable of remarkable independence, but their core programming always included specific mission parameters and objectives. Artemis wouldn't have sought him out randomly. She would have been directed to do so, either by explicit command or by activation of contingency protocols embedded in her training. "We don't have much time," Rivera continued, breaking the silence. "Based on your location and current weather conditions, I estimate multiple recovery teams will converge on your position within 6 hours. Some will be legitimate government assets, others almost certainly will not. You need to move immediately." "Move where?" Ethan asked. "I'm snowed in with 3 feet of accumulation. Ground transport is impossible without specialized vehicles, which would be easily spotted across open terrain. Your emergency kit should include access codes for a specialized extraction protocol," Rivera said. "Designated Thunder Basin. It was established as a contingency for handlers potentially compromised during deep cover operations." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter temperatures. Thunder Basin protocols were last resort. Measures created for scenarios where normal extraction channels were unavailable or compromised. They existed outside standard command structures, operated by assets unknown, even to most senior leadership. "That's extreme," he replied carefully. "Thunder Basin would indicate a fundamental breakdown in command integrity." "That's exactly what we're facing," Rivera confirmed grimly. "Ethan, in the 3 years since you left, things have changed dramatically. The program didn't just end, it splintered into competing initiatives, each with different oversight and objectives. What happened in Kazakhstan wasn't a failure. It was the first indication that the enhanced assets had developed capabilities beyond their creators' intentions. Capabilities that certain factions found deeply threatening. Artemis had moved to the window again, her attention focused on something in the distant sky, something Ethan couldn't yet see or hear. Her posture had subtly shifted, body lowering and muscles tensing. "We have incoming," Ethan reported, reaching for his binoculars. "Artemis has detected approaching aircraft." "They're moving faster than I anticipated," Rivera replied urgently. "Ethan, you need to make a decision now. If you stay, you'll be caught between competing operations, each with their own agenda for Artemis. If you activate Thunder Basin, you're committing to a path that takes you completely off the grid." Through his binoculars, Ethan could now see what Artemis had detected, a small dot on the horizon, approaching rapidly despite the lingering weather conditions. Based on its flight profile, it was likely a specialized aircraft with all-weather capabilities. Exactly the type used for high-priority extraction operations. "What about you?" Ethan asked, already moving to gather essential gear. "Won't they trace this communication?" "Let me worry about that," Rivera assured him. "I've maintained my own contingencies. What matters is keeping Artemis's data secure until we can determine who can be trusted with it. EK-Pack designed for extreme conditions." Ethan opened the rear door, facing away from the approaching helicopter. Artemis shot through the opening, immediately adjusting her path to precisely northeast, directly toward the extraction point, despite there being no visible landmarks or trail. As Ethan followed her into the blinding white landscape, the sound of the helicopter grew louder behind them. The approaching storm front would provide some visual cover, but their tracks would be clearly visible in the pristine snow, a trail leading directly from the ranch house into the wilderness, unless someone intervened to eliminate those tracks. Even as Ethan and Artemis pushed forward through knee-deep snow, the specialized Thunder Basin device in his pack was already executing its secondary protocols, connecting to the ranch's hidden security systems and initiating the ultimate contingency measure. In exactly 14 minutes, charges placed at strategic points throughout the property would detonate, triggering a controlled but substantial avalanche from the slope behind the house, completely burying his tracks and creating a natural disaster. Scenario that would significantly complicate any pursuit. The ranch he had rebuilt after leaving his military life would be destroyed, along with any evidence of their departure direction. It was an extreme measure, but Ethan understood the stakes all too well. Whatever Artemis carried, whatever intelligence had multiple agencies converging on his isolated property, was significant enough to justify such drastic steps. As they crested the first ridge, putting momentary visual separation between them and the approaching helicopter, Ethan glanced down at the remarkable animal forging the path ahead of him. Artemis moved with purpose and precision, navigating the difficult terrain as if following an invisible guide. Her appearance at his farm during the blizzard hadn't been coincidence or random chance. It had been the execution of carefully embedded contingency protocols, activated when whatever covert operation she'd been part of had gone critically wrong. In the distance, the helicopter circled his property once before beginning its landing approach. They had perhaps 12 minutes before the search would begin in earnest, hopefully enough time to reach whatever extraction awaited them at the designated coordinates. The snow continued to fall, lighter now, but still enough to begin gradually, obscuring their tracks. Artemis maintained a punishing pace, pushing northeast towards something only she seemed able to perceive. Whatever awaited them at the extraction point, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. His quiet retirement had ended the moment a seemingly stray dog had appeared at his barn during a blizzard. The future that now unfolded would test every skill and instinct from his former life. A life he had thought safely behind him until Artemis had brought it quite literally to his doorstep. The northeastern forest boundary of Ethan's property offered minimal cover, primarily young pine trees and scattered rock formations still visible above the snow. Under normal circumstances, it would provide poor concealment from aerial pursuit. Today, however, nature provided unexpected assistance as the weather front that had followed the blizzard began intensifying, bringing renewed snowfall and decreasing visibility. Artemis navigated the difficult terrain with remarkable efficiency, instinctively finding the most passable route through deep snow and dense underbrush. She maintained a steady pace that balanced speed with energy conservation, a critical calculation given the harsh conditions and unknown distance to whatever extraction awaited them. Behind them, the distant sound of the helicopter's rotors changed pitch, indicating it had landed at the ranch. Ethan checked his watch. 11 minutes until the Thunder Basin protocol would trigger the controlled avalanche. Not much time for whoever had arrived to search the property before being forced to evacuate or risk burial. "We need to put more distance between us and the ranch," Ethan told Artemis, who responded by subtly increasing her pace. As they pushed deeper into the forest, Ethan's tactical mind assessed their situation. The satellite phone and specialized communication equipment in his pack created potential tracking vulnerabilities, but powering down completely would eliminate any chance of receiving critical updates or extraction coordinates. Standard procedure. In evasion scenarios, called for periodic communication windows, brief moments of connectivity separated by extended silent periods. But those protocols assumed conventional pursuit, not the advanced technical capabilities likely deployed against an asset of Artemis's significance. At a natural break in the terrain, a small ridge offering momentary shelter from the wind, Ethan knelt beside Artemis to check the extraction coordinates. The enhanced canine watched him with evident understanding, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. 3 more miles to the extraction point, he told her, showing the digital map as if briefing a human teammate. It was a habit from their training days, treating the enhanced canines as operational partners rather than tools or assets. That approach had always yielded the best results, though it had made some officials deeply uncomfortable with the program's direction. Artemis studied the map briefly before turning her attention to Ethan's backpack, nosing at a specific compartment with deliberate intent. "What is it, girl?" he asked, opening the indicated pocket to find emergency medical supplies. Artemis immediately focused on a small case containing specialized auto-injectors, pharmaceutical compounds developed specifically for field operations where conventional medical care was unavailable. "You need medical intervention?" Ethan asked, concerned. While her physical condition had seemed remarkably good given her ordeal, internal injuries or specialized implant complications wouldn't necessarily be visible to external examination. Artemis responded with the subtle head movement that indicated negative. Instead, she nudged the case again and then touched her specialized collar with her nose. "The collar needs maintenance," Ethan guessed, trying to interpret her communication. This time, Artemis gave the affirmative signal, followed by a quick series of movements that translated roughly to time-sensitive, critical, secure, specialized communication protocols developed for situations where verbal exchange was impossible or compromised. Understanding dawned. "The data in your collar is degrading or compromised, and you need the medical kit to stabilize it." Such a scenario had been theorized during the program's development, using modified medical delivery systems to maintain sensitive electronic components in field conditions where proper technical support was unavailable. Artemis confirmed with another affirmative signal, adding the gesture for immediate priority. Ethan opened the specialized medical kit, revealing an array of precisely organized components designed for both conventional field medicine and the unique requirements of enhanced operative support. Among them was a small device originally developed to regulate the specialized neurochemical implants that supported the enhanced canine's advanced cognitive functions. In an emergency, it could also serve as a power stabilizer for the sophisticated electronics embedded in their equipment. Working quickly but methodically, Ethan connected the device to a nearly invisible port concealed within Artemis's collar. The small display illuminated with diagnostic information, confirming his suspicion. The collar's power system was failing, likely due to extended field operation without proper maintenance. Without intervention, the critical data it contained would be irretrievably lost within hours. The stabilization process would take approximately 7 minutes, according to the device's estimate. Precious time, while pursuit was almost certainly organizing behind them. However, the alternative was losing whatever intelligence Artemis had been tasked with protecting, intelligence apparently worth the convergence of multiple government agencies and possibly foreign operatives on his remote Montana property. 7 minutes. Ethan told Artemis, who had already positioned herself to maintain surveillance of their back trail while the procedure continued. "Then we move fast to the extraction point." As the device worked to stabilize the collar's systems, Ethan took the opportunity to study their surroundings more carefully. The coordinates for Thunder Basin extraction put their destination just beyond the national forest boundary that adjoined his property, an area he had hiked occasionally during his years at the ranch, but never with particular attention to its strategic possibilities. The choice wasn't random, he realized. Thunder Basin protocols were designed to utilize pre-established extraction points near the residences of former operatives, locations scouted and prepared long before they might be needed, often without the knowledge of the operatives themselves. The revelation that such preparations had been made near his ranch was unsettling, suggesting his retirement had always been conditional in the eyes of certain agencies. From their current position, a faint but distinctive sound caught Ethan's attention. The low-frequency thrum of rotors, different from the helicopter that had landed at his ranch. This was larger, heavier equipment approaching from the east, the direction of the nearest military installation, over 200 miles away. Whatever was coming, it represented significant resources and authorization. The stabilization device beeped softly, indicating completion. The diagnostic display showed the collar systems now operating at 83% efficiency, far from optimal but sufficient to preserve its critical data. Ethan carefully disconnected the device and returned it to his pack. "Time to move," he told Artemis, who immediately resumed their northeastern trajectory. As they pushed forward through increasingly difficult terrain, the distant explosion behind them confirmed the Thunder Basin protocol had executed as designed. The controlled charges would have triggered a substantial avalanche, effectively burying the ranch house and any evidence of their departure direction under tons of snow and debris. The natural disaster scenario would create confusion and delay, buying them precious time to reach the extraction point. The extraction coordinates led them to a seemingly unremarkable clearing approximately half a mile beyond the national forest boundary. No infrastructure or obvious pickup zone was visible, just an open area surrounded by dense pine forest and rocky outcroppings. To casual observation, it appeared to be nothing more than a natural break in the woodland. Artemis, however, moved with certainty toward a specific location at the clearing's edge, where a large fallen pine created a natural windbreak. Beneath a thick layer of snow and forest debris, her paws uncovered a small metal panel with no visible markings or access mechanisms. Ethan recognized the design immediately, a biometric access point for a subsurface facility constructed to remain undetectable to advanced scanning technologies. Such installations were rare, extraordinarily expensive, and authorized only for the most sensitive contingency operations. Thunder Basin wasn't just an extraction protocol, Ethan realized aloud. It's a black site. Artemis had already positioned herself on the panel, which was scanning her specialized implants for authentication. After a moment, a soft tone indicated successful recognition, and the panel illuminated with a humanoid handprint outline, requesting secondary authentication from Ethan. As he placed his palm on the scanner, Ethan knew he was crossing a threshold, from which there would be no easy return. Thunder Basin protocols existed outside conventional command structures, operating on pre-authorized contingencies that could remain viable for years without active management. Engaging such protocols meant committing to their operational parameters without knowing exactly what mission they had been designed to support. The scanner completed its analysis with another soft tone. The ground beneath them shuddered slightly, as hidden hydraulic systems activated for the first time in what must have been years. A section of the forest floor, approximately 8 feet square, began to descend slowly, revealing a vertical access shaft with reinforced walls. Ethan and Artemis stepped onto the descending platform, which smoothly carried them below ground level. Above them, the camouflaged access point closed seamlessly, restoring the illusion of undisturbed forest floor, just as the sound of approaching aircraft became audible in the distance. The descent continued for nearly 30 seconds, suggesting significant depth before opening into a surprisingly large installation. Clinical white lighting activated automatically, revealing a facility that appeared to have been constructed for long-term occupation. Air circulation systems hummed to life, distributing a subtle scent of filtered, recycled atmosphere throughout. "The space, welcome to Thunder Basin Contingency Site," announced an automated voice as they stepped from the platform into the main area. "Current status, dormant. Last maintenance cycle 24 months ago. All systems functional, awaiting authorization for full activation." The facility was organized around a central operations room equipped with communication systems, surveillance, monitors, and what appeared to be medical and scientific equipment in sealed containment units. Adjacent corridors led to what presumably were living quarters, storage areas, and possibly additional specialized spaces. Everything was impeccably maintained despite apparent years of disuse, suggesting automated maintenance protocols had remained active. Authorization: Hayes, Ethan R. Master Sergeant, Task Force Sigma. Authentication: Chimera 9 Echo 5, Ethan stated, following standard protocol for secure facility activation. Voice pattern authenticated, the system responded. Biometric confirmation required for full activation. A panel opened in the wall nearest Ethan, revealing another, more sophisticated scanner. This one required not just a handprint, but retinal and DNA verification as well. After completing the comprehensive authentication process, the facility's systems fully activated, sealed doors opening, additional lighting engaging, and previously darkened monitors illuminating with status reports. Thunder Basin contingency. Site now active, the system announced. Sealed communications protocols engaged. External access restricted. Current occupancy 2. Authorized personnel Hayes, Ethan R., and asset designation Artemis. The specificity of the authorization struck Ethan immediately. The system had been programmed to recognize not just him, but Artemis specifically, suggesting this facility had been designed with both of them in mind. The implications were unsettling, pointing toward long-term contingency planning far beyond. Standard procedures, display facility purpose and mission parameters, Ethan commanded. Primary purpose: secure containment and analysis of priority intelligence, designate Prometheus, the system responded. Mission parameters: extraction, verification, and secure transmission of intelligence obtained by asset Artemis during operation. Blackstone and subsequent deployments. Secondary purpose: safe harbor for compromised operatives pending secure extraction or reassignment. Artemis had moved to a specialized station in the corner of the operations room, an area specifically designed for enhanced canine interface. The workspace included modified equipment that could be operated without human hands, utilizing the specialized training that allowed enhanced assets to interact directly with certain technologies. As she positioned herself at the interface station, a secure access port extended toward her specialized collar. Without hesitation, Artemis aligned the collar's connection point with the interface, initiating a data transfer protocol. The primary monitor displayed the progress. Artemis Asset Intelligence Download, initiating. Estimated completion time, 43 minutes. Security protocol maximum. Ethan turned his attention to the facility's security systems, which were now displaying real-time surveillance of the surface area. Multiple aircraft were visible through the thermal imaging system. At least 3 helicopters and what appeared to be a specialized VTOL transport with advanced scanning capabilities. Ground vehicles were also approaching from multiple directions, their progress slowed by the deep snow, but steadily converging on the area. "We've got a lot of company," Ethan observed grimly, "and they're very, very interested in what you're carrying, girl." Artemis continued her data transfer, the process apparently requiring her full concentration. Whatever intelligence she had been accumulating during 3 years of covert operations, it was now being transferred to the Thunder Basin facility's secure systems, presumably for analysis and eventual transmission to authorized recipients. The question that troubled Ethan most, however, remained unanswered. Who had originally authorized Artemis's mission? Who had sent her specifically to him when that mission was compromised? And perhaps most critically, who could be trusted with the intelligence she had risked everything to protect? In the fortified situation room of the Executive Protective Directorate, a deliberately nondescript office suite within the Department of Homeland Security complex in Washington, Deputy Director Catherine Westbrook stood before a wall of high definition displays streaming real-time footage from Montana, The winter storm had compromised some visual feeds, but thermal imaging and advanced radar systems provided a clear operational picture, multiple teams converging on a now-empty ranch property, partially buried under a substantial avalanche. "No life signs detected at the primary location," reported the tactical coordinator, a former Delta Force operator who now managed Directorate Field Operations. "Structure has sustained significant damage from what appears to be a controlled snow slide triggered by precisely placed charges. Evidence suggests deliberate implementation of a pre-established escape protocol." "Hayes knew we were coming," Westbrook observed, her tone carefully neutral despite the significant operational setback. "Timeline from detection to response?" 47 minutes from confirmed RFID ping to first team on the ground, the coordinator replied. "Well within operational parameters for an asset of this classification. Westbrook's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. And yet the target evaded intercept despite being located in a remote property during extreme weather conditions with limited mobility options. Somebody warned him. The assessment hung in the air, its implications rippling through the assembled senior staff. A breach in operational security at this level suggested either a catastrophic technical failure or, far more concerning, deliberate interference from within the intelligence community itself. Satellite thermal tracking indicates 2 sets of tracks leading northeast from the property before being obscured by the avalanche, offered the technical specialist monitoring environmental data. Consistent with 2 subjects moving on foot through deep snow. Given current conditions and terrain, their maximum range would be approximately 4 to 5 miles from the origin point. Expand the search perimeter to 7 miles. Westbrook ordered. Deploy the enhanced sensor package on all aerial assets. If they're out there, I want them found before sunset. As the operational team adjusted their search parameters, Westbrook stepped away to a secure alcove where a separate communication system operated independently from standard government networks. The specialized terminal required multiple layers of biometric authentication before connecting to a secure video conference already in progress. 4 individuals appeared on the encrypted feed, their identities concealed by digital masking and voice alteration, standard protocol for the oversight committee that had authorized Project Artemis and its successors. They were identified only by color designations: red, blue, green, and black. The asset is mobile and accompanied by its former handler, Westbrook reported without preamble. Recovery teams are in pursuit, but encountering unexpected resistance. Hayes implemented advanced countermeasures suggesting prior knowledge of our approach. That information was compartmentalized at the highest levels, Blue responded, digital distortion unable to fully mask the tension in his voice. Only 7 individuals had access to the recovery authorization, all with Omega-level clearance. Then we have a fundamental security breach, Westbrook concluded. The question becomes whether it's isolated to this operation or represents broader compromise. The priority remains recovery of the asset and its accumulated intelligence. Black interjected, the authoritative tone suggesting senior leadership position within the intelligence community or possibly direct military command. Secondary objectives include containment of all knowledge regarding the asset's capabilities and operational history. Hayes represents a significant security vulnerability on both counts. The unspoken implication hung heavily in the secure communication. Ethan Hayes, despite his distinguished service record and prior role in the program, had become a liability requiring management. A euphemism Westbrook understood all too well from her 17 years in covert operations. Current operational assets are authorized for recovery only, she reminded the committee carefully. Any adjustment to mission parameters would require explicit authorization and documentation. Documentation has been prepared as a contingency, Red replied smoothly. Operational necessity may require flexible response options depending on Hayes's level of cooperation and whether external actors have made contact. External actors. The euphemism sent a chill through Westbrook despite her years of professional detachment. Intelligence indicators had suggested growing foreign interest in the enhanced canine program for years, particularly after rumors of Artemis's unprecedented cognitive developments had leaked through carefully monitored channels. At least 3. Foreign intelligence services had active acquisition programs targeting the technology, with documented attempts to recruit or compromise personnel connected to Project Artemis. "We have a developing situation," Green announced abruptly, apparently responding to information not visible on the shared feed. Thunder Basin protocols have been activated in the search sector. Westbrook maintained her composed expression, despite the significant development. Thunder Basin represented a semi-autonomous contingency system established during the early days of the War on Terror, designed as a last resort alternative when conventional command structures might be compromised. Its activation required both physical access to specialized equipment and authentication by personnel with specific authorization. Hayes shouldn't have Thunder Basin clearance, Blue stated with evident concern. Those protocols were restricted to command-level access after the program restructuring. Apparently someone disagreed with that restriction, Black observed dryly. Director Westbrook, adjust your operational posture accordingly. Thunder Basin activation suggests we're dealing with a coordinated contingency rather than desperate. Evasion. Additional resources are being deployed to your command, including specialized assets with Thunder Basin override capabilities. The secure communication terminated, leaving Westbrook alone with implications that extended far beyond a simple asset recovery operation. The activation of Thunder Basin protocols transformed the situation from an internal security matter to a potential power struggle between competing factions within the intelligence community itself. Such conflicts rarely ended without significant collateral damage, both operational and personal. Returning to the main situation room, Westbrook found the tactical display had been updated with new information. A specialized sensor package had detected unusual electromagnetic readings approximately 4.7 miles northeast of the Hayes property, subtle energy signatures consistent with the activation of sophisticated subsurface systems. "We've located a probable Thunder Basin access point," the tactical coordinator confirmed, highlighting the area on the main display. Historical satellite imagery shows no surface structures, but ground-penetrating radar from our specialized aerial platform is detecting what appears to be a hardened facility approximately 40 feet below ground level. Thunder Basin installations were designed to resist conventional detection and penetration, Westbrook noted, recalling operational briefings from early in her career. Standard breach protocols won't be effective. That's why these arrived. "Ma'am," the coordinator replied, gesturing toward a secure case that had just been delivered by armed courier. "Specialized access package designated Skeleton Key, delivered under Presidential Authorization Code with your biometric lock." The presidential authorization was unexpected, suggesting involvement at levels Westbrook hadn't anticipated for what had been characterized as a routine asset recovery operation. The rapid escalation indicated either extraordinary value in Artemis's intelligence or concerns about who might be attempting to access it through unofficial channels. After confirming her identity through multiple verification methods, Westbrook opened the secure case to find specialized equipment designed specifically for Thunder Basin counterintelligence operations. Tools created to override the very systems designed to operate independently during critical breakdowns in command authority. Their existence had been theoretical in her understanding of contingency protocols. The reality of their deployment, suggesting layers of preparation and counter-preparation, she found deeply unsettling. "Establish a secure perimeter around the detected facility," she ordered. "No engagement until specialized teams arrive. Maintain aerial surveillance, but keep distance sufficient to avoid triggering automated defensive systems." As her team mobilized to implement these instructions, Westbrook stepped away once more to access a separate, personal communication device. One, not connected to official channels or subject to standard monitoring protocols. The message she sent was brief, encrypted using methodologies known to only a handful of individuals within the intelligence community. Thunder Basin active. Cross-contamination confirmed. Implement stellar-wind protocols immediately. The response came seconds later. Acknowledged. Stay in play. True North established. The cryptic exchange confirmed what Westbrook had suspected since the operation began. The situation extended far beyond a simple recovery mission. Competing agendas were in motion, with Artemis and her handler now caught between forces that had been maneuvering for position long before today's convergence in the Montana wilderness. Meanwhile, deep within the Thunder Basin facility, Ethan monitored the growing activity on the surface with increasing concern. The surveillance systems showed at least 5 specialized teams establishing positions around the hidden entrance, with additional forces inbound from multiple directions. The operational patterns were familiar, standard encirclement tactics, for high-value target acquisition, but executed with resources far beyond normal deployment parameters. "They really want you back," he told Artemis, who had completed her data transfer and now sat beside him, studying the tactical displays with evident comprehension, or more specifically, they want whatever you've been carrying for the past 3 years. The facility's secure systems had begun preliminary analysis of the transferred intelligence, displaying occasional fragments on secondary monitors as encryption layers were processed and catalogued. Even these glimpses revealed information of extraordinary sensitivity. Operational details from covert activities across multiple continents, surveillance data from locations with restricted access, and most concerning, documentation of what appeared to be unauthorized actions by American intelligence personnel operating without proper oversight or authorization. "No wonder they're pulling out all the stops," Ethan muttered, as particularly damning evidence flashed briefly on a screen. "You've been documenting something that was never supposed to see the light of day," Artemis confirmed with her subtle, affirmative signal, adding the gesture that indicated deliberate mission parameters rather than incidental observation. The implication was clear. Her role for the past 3 years hadn't been standard intelligence gathering, but targeted internal surveillance, collecting evidence of activities that powerful individuals had gone to great lengths to conceal. The question of who had authorized such a mission and who had directed Artemis to seek out Ethan specifically when that mission was compromised remained critically important. Thunder Basin protocols required authorization at the highest levels, suggesting either official sanction for this apparent internal investigation or a faction within leadership with sufficient authority to implement classified contingencies. Without broader approval, a priority alert from the facility's communication system interrupted Ethan's analysis. Colonel Rivera was attempting contact through secure Thunder Basin channels, a capability that shouldn't have been available to her based on standard program protocols. After initiating comprehensive security verification, Ethan accepted the connection. Rivera's image appeared on the primary display, her background deliberately obscured to conceal her location. "You made it to the facility," she observed with evident relief. "Good. We don't have much time before they implement override. Protocols. They've already deployed specialized access teams," Ethan confirmed. Looks like Thunder Basin isn't as independent as advertised. No security system is truly autonomous, Ethan. There are always back doors. The question is, who holds the keys and when they choose to use them? Rivera's expression turned grimmer. What matters now is completing the transmission protocol. Has Artemis transferred the intelligence package? Completed approximately 12 minutes ago. The system is processing and preparing for transmission, but I don't have a designated recipient. Who exactly am I supposed to send this to? Rivera's hesitation was brief but noticeable. The transmission coordinates are embedded in Artemis's operational parameters. She'll need to authorize the final destination, a security measure we implemented after discovering potential compromise in the command structure. The approach was unprecedented in Ethan's experience, entrusting final authorization to an enhanced asset rather than human controllers. Such protocols would have been considered dangerously unorthodox during his time with the program, suggesting significant evolution in operational procedures since his departure. You trusted a dog with the final decision on where to send classified intelligence, Ethan asked, unable to completely mask his skepticism, despite his respect for the enhanced canine's capabilities. Artemis isn't just a dog, Ethan, Rivera replied, with uncharacteristic intensity. By the time you left the program, the cognitive enhancements had progressed far beyond our initial parameters. The fifth-generation assets developed capabilities that even their creators didn't fully anticipate, including judgment and discernment that proved more reliable than many human operators in certain contexts. As if understanding the discussion, Artemis moved to a specialized interface station and activated a secure protocol with a series of precise movements. The main display shifted to show a transmission pathway that bypassed conventional intelligence channels entirely, routing instead through a complex series of relays that eventually connected to a secure server indicated only by an alphanumeric. Designation Oversight Prime Alpha. Congressional Intelligence Oversight. Ethan recognized immediately. She's sending everything directly to the committee responsible for intelligence accountability and oversight. The only entity with both the authority to act on this intelligence and sufficient independence to withstand the pressure that will follow, Rivera confirmed. Artemis spent 3 years documenting an unauthorized program operating within our intelligence services, but outside all established oversight, a program that continued the most controversial aspects of Project Artemis without approval, accountability, or ethical constraints. The implications were staggering, suggesting a level of internal corruption that extended to the highest levels of the intelligence community. No wonder the response had been so overwhelming once Artemis was detected. What she carried wasn't just sensitive intelligence, but evidence that could end careers and possibly result in serious criminal charges for those involved. And now we have teams converging with specialized Thunder Basin override capabilities, Ethan noted grimly. How long before they breach this facility? Their standard protocols require approximately 40 minutes to implement full override, Rivera replied. The transmission will complete in 27 minutes, according to current estimates, a narrow margin, but sufficient if we can delay their approach. We? Ethan questioned, raising an eyebrow. Rivera's composed expression shifted to a tight smile. Did you think you were the only former operative with contingency plans, Ethan? Help is already in motion. Just hold your position and ensure that transmission completes. Everything else is being handled. As the communication terminated, Ethan turned to Artemis, who watched him with steadfast calm despite the intensifying situation. Looks like we're making some powerful enemies today, girl, he told her. I hope your faith in the Oversight Committee is justified. Artemis responded with her affirmative signal. the same unwavering confidence that had characterized the enhanced canines throughout the program. Whatever she had witnessed and documented over the past 3 years, it had led her to risk everything to ensure the evidence reached those with authority to address it properly. On the surface monitors, the specialized breach teams had begun, deploying their equipment around the hidden entrance, preparing to override systems designed explicitly to resist such intervention. The race had begun, transmission against breach, accountability against concealment, with Ethan and Artemis caught at the center of forces that had been building toward this confrontation for years. The Thunder Basin facility's main display showed the data transmission progress at 43% completion, approximately 15 minutes remaining before Artemis's gathered intelligence would reach the Congressional Oversight Committee. On the surface monitors, specialized breach teams had deployed a perimeter of equipment designed to penetrate the facility's defenses, their methodical approach suggesting professional familiarity with the Thunder Basin security architecture. "They're not rushing," Ethan observed, studying their tactical positioning. "That's concerning." The deliberate pace indicated confidence rather than urgency, suggesting the breach teams believed they had sufficient time to accomplish their objective, despite the active transmission. Either they underestimated the facility's capabilities, or they possessed resources beyond what standard protocols anticipated. Neither possibility was reassuring. A secondary alert drew Ethan's attention to another monitor, where the facility's analysis systems had completed preliminary processing of a segment from Artemis's intelligence cache. The information now displayed in coherent form rather than encrypted fragments, revealing operational details that confirmed his worst suspicions. "Project Phoenix," he read aloud, scanning the documentation with growing concern. "Unofficial continuation of the Artemis Cognitive Enhancement Program, operating without congressional authorization or oversight. Primary objective: development of autonomous intelligence assets capable of independent deep cover operations without handler supervision." Artemis moved to his side, watching as he absorbed the implications of what she had been documenting. The files detailed a clandestine program that had continued the most controversial aspects of Project Artemis after its official termination, pushing the boundaries of enhanced canine capabilities far beyond ethical guidelines or legal authorization. They continued the program illegally, Ethan realized, anger edging his voice. After Kazakhstan, when the enhanced assets demonstrated unexpected autonomy, they didn't terminate the program at all. They just moved it off books to develop exactly the capabilities that had alarmed oversight in the first place. The documentation revealed a disturbing progression. Each generation of enhanced canines had demonstrated greater cognitive capability and operational independence than the last, with the fifth-generation assets like Artemis approaching a threshold that the project's own scientists had termed emergent sentience, essentially self-awareness and independent judgment comparable to human cognition in certain domains. This development had triggered the program's official termination after multiple fifth-generation assets, including Artemis, had refused to execute mission parameters they had somehow determined to be ethically compromised. The Kazakhstan incident hadn't been an operational failure as officially reported. It had been the first documented case of enhanced assets making independent moral judgments that contradicted their handlers' directives. "You didn't just refuse the mission," Ethan said quietly, looking at Artemis with new understanding. "You actively prevented it because you recognized something the human operatives missed or ignored." Artemis confirmed with her affirmative signal, then used a series of specialized movements to direct Ethan's attention to a specific file within the displayed documents. The file contained operation details that had been classified above his access level even when he was active in the program. the true nature of the Kazakhstan mission that had led to the program's official termination. The mission parameters described a covert operation targeting a facility believed to be developing biological weapons, a high-priority objective that would typically justify aggressive intervention. However, Artemis and two other enhanced canines had refused to execute the final assault, physically blocking their handlers from proceeding despite direct commands. Subsequent investigation, buried in classified addenda, never shared with most operatives, revealed the true nature of the facility, not a weapons laboratory, but a medical research center developing vaccines for regional diseases. The intelligence that had identified it as a threat had been deliberately falsified by elements within a rival agency seeking to eliminate competition for operational funding by demonstrating superior results. "You prevented an atrocity," Ethan realized, a cold weight settling in his stomach as he understood the full implications. And instead of acknowledging the error, they buried the truth and labeled you as unpredictably non-compliant, justifying the program's official termination, while continuing it secretly with assets they considered more controllable. The documentation further revealed that Project Phoenix had specifically excluded fifth-generation assets like Artemis from continued development, focusing instead on creating enhanced canines with more limited autonomy, essentially attempting to preserve the cognitive capabilities while eliminating the independent ethical judgment that had proven problematic in operational contexts. This explained why Artemis had been officially listed as decommissioned, but had actually remained active for the past 3 years under deep cover protocols. She had been reassigned to an accountability operation outside normal command structures, apparently authorized by elements within leadership concerned about the ethical implications of Project Phoenix. Someone on the inside was worried enough to create a backup plan, Ethan concluded, pieces falling into place. They assigned you to document what was happening, knowing you had both the capability to understand its significance and the ethical framework to recognize violations. Artemis confirmed this assessment, directing Ethan's attention to another file that revealed her operational parameters for the past 3 years. Systematic documentation of Project Phoenix activities, including identification of personnel operating without proper authorization, tracking of resources diverted from legitimate programs, and collection of evidence regarding potentially illegal applications of the technology. The most disturbing revelations involved proposed deployment of limited autonomy-enhanced assets for domestic surveillance operations, explicitly prohibited under the original program guidelines and potentially illegal under multiple statutes governing intelligence activities within U.S. borders. "No wonder they're pulling out all the stops to intercept this transmission," Ethan muttered, understanding now why such extraordinary resources had been mobilized so quickly. The evidence Artemis carried wouldn't just end careers. It could potentially trigger the most significant intelligence community scandal since the Church Committee investigations of the 1970s. A priority alert from the security systems interrupted his review of the files. The breach teams had initiated their primary approach, deploying specialized equipment designed to override the facility's independent systems. Estimated time to complete breach: 17 minutes, potentially longer than the transmission would require, but with minimal margin for error or complications. "We need to buy more time," Ethan told Artemis, who had already moved to a tactical station, monitoring the breach team's approach with evident strategic assessment. The enhanced canine's response surprised him. Rather than indicating defensive measures, she activated a secondary communication protocol linking directly to the facility's most secure transmission system. The display showed outgoing communication directed not to the Congressional Oversight Committee, but to multiple media organizations, law enforcement agencies, and public interest groups specializing in government accountability. A dead man's switch, Ethan realized with grudging admiration. If the primary transmission is interrupted, you've arranged for the evidence to go public through multiple channels simultaneously. This contingency explained the breach team's measured approach. They weren't just racing to stop the congressional transmission, but operating under constraints to avoid triggering the broader release protocol. The situation had evolved beyond a simple classification concern into a complex risk calculation, with those trying to contain the information caught between competing worst-case scenarios. As Ethan processed these implications, an unexpected alert activated on the facility's communication system. Colonel Rivera was attempting contact again, this time through an emergency override channel designed for critical updates during active operations. "We have a significant development," she reported as soon as the connection established, her normally composed expression showing uncharacteristic tension. "Our monitoring indicates Deputy Director Westbrook has implemented stellar wind protocols." "I'm not familiar with that designation," Ethan admitted, though the grave tone of Rivera's delivery made its significance clear. "It's a specialized contingency for scenarios involving potential compromise at the highest levels of intelligence leadership," she explained. "Essentially, Westbrook has activated protocols that operate outside normal chain of command, answering directly to a special committee with presidential authorization." "That sounds like exactly what we need," Ethan observed cautiously. "If leadership is compromised, independent oversight should take control." "Under normal circumstances, yes," Rivera agreed. "The concern is that stellar wind was implemented without the verification measures designed to prevent its abuse. We can't determine whether Westbrook is activating legitimate oversight or implementing a containment protocol disguised as accountability." The distinction was crucial. The difference between reinforcements arriving to secure Artemis's evidence or specialized assets deployed to ensure it never reached its intended recipients. Without knowing Westbrook's true alignment in the internal conflict now unfolding, they couldn't determine whether the approaching forces represented salvation or a more sophisticated threat. "How does this affect our current situation?" Ethan asked, focusing on immediate tactical considerations. "Stellar wind authorization grants access to specialized capabilities normally restricted even within the intelligence community," Rivera replied grimly, "including override methods that can penetrate Thunder Basin security more rapidly than standard breach protocols. You need to prepare for potential access within minutes rather than the expected time frame." The warning was barely delivered before the facility's security systems confirmed an accelerated breach attempt, sophisticated countermeasures deploying against Thunder Basin's independent protocols with efficiency that suggested exceptional resources and authorization. "They've implemented quantum decryption," Rivera observed, monitoring the breach progress through her own systems. "That's restricted technology, Ethan. Classified above top secret and limited to national emergency scenarios. Someone has authorized extraordinary measures to prevent this transmission." On the main display, the transmission progress showed 72% completion, approximately 7 minutes remaining under optimal conditions. The breach team's new approach would potentially gain access in 5 to 6 minutes, according to the security systems estimates. The margin had narrowed dramatically, transforming a likely success into an uncertain race against sophisticated intervention. "What's our contingency if they breach before transmission completes?" Ethan asked Rivera, already evaluating potential defensive options within the facility. "The dead man's switch Artemis established is our primary backup," she confirmed. But we should assume they're aware of that protocol and have countermeasures prepared. These aren't conventional operators, Ethan. They represent interests willing to risk extraordinary exposure to prevent this evidence from reaching proper oversight. The implications of such determination were deeply troubling. Legitimate security concerns, even involving classified operations, typically followed established protocols for containment and management. The extreme measures now deployed suggested something beyond standard classification protection, individuals acting to conceal activities they knew would not survive proper scrutiny, regardless of national security justifications. Artemis didn't just document unauthorized operations, Ethan realized, studying the intelligence still flowing across secondary displays. She found something specific, something they're desperate to keep contained. Rivera's expression confirmed his assessment. The final segment of her intelligence package contains documentation of Project Phoenix's ultimate objective, an application of the technology that went far beyond enhanced canine operatives, something designated Oracle Protocol that even I don't have clearance to access. Artemis had moved to another specialized interface, activating systems Ethan didn't recognize from his training on Thunder Basin facilities. Her actions demonstrated familiarity with protocols apparently implemented after his departure from the program, suggesting continued evolution of both the facilities and the enhanced assets integration with them. "What is she doing?" Ethan asked, watching as Artemis manipulated the specialized controls with remarkable precision. "Implementing the final contingency," Rivera replied, her tone suggesting both approval and concern. "If the transmission is interrupted, Artemis has authorization to implement Protocol Omega, essentially direct interface with the facility's secure systems to transfer her complete memory and cognitive architecture into the Thunder Basin quantum storage array." The revelation stunned Ethan. Such technology had been theoretical during his time with the program, the potential to preserve an enhanced asset's complete neural pattern in secure digital form, effectively creating a persistent version of their consciousness that could continue to provide intelligence and analysis even if the physical asset was compromised or destroyed. "That's possible now?" he asked, watching as Artemis continued preparing the specialized systems. "Last I knew, the neural complexity was too great for existing quantum storage technology. The breakthrough came after you left," Rivera confirmed. Fifth-generation assets like Artemis proved capable of organizing their own neural patterns in ways that facilitated digital preservation. Another capacity that emerged unexpectedly and caused significant concern among certain oversight elements. The security alert intensified, indicating the breach teams had accelerated their approach beyond initial estimates. New projection: facility access in approximately 4 minutes, against transmission completion in just over 5 minutes. The margin had narrowed to critical levels, with success or failure now potentially determined by seconds rather than minutes. "We need a diversion," Ethan decided, moving toward the facility's defensive systems. "Something to disrupt their breach. Attempt just long enough to complete the transmission." Before he could implement any countermeasures, however, Artemis interrupted with a decisive movement, directing his attention to another option, a protocol labeled Guardian Response in the facility's secure systems. The enhanced canine's intent was clear. This protocol represented their best option for delaying the breach team's approach. The Guardian Response Protocol activated with a series of automated security measures unlike anything Ethan had encountered during his operational career. Throughout the surrounding forest, camouflaged defensive systems created a multi-layered perimeter of non-lethal countermeasures. Sonic emitters interfered with communication equipment, electromagnetic pulses disabled unshielded electronics, and aerosol compounds degraded sensor effectiveness. On the surface monitors, the effect was immediate. The carefully coordinated breach teams fragmented into isolated units, their synchronized approach dissolving into individual tactical responses. Their specialized equipment continued functioning, protected by military-grade shielding, but the operators were effectively isolated from each other and their command structure. "That should buy us the time we need," Ethan observed, studying the tactical display. The transmission progress showed 83% completion, approximately 3 minutes remaining. The revised breach projection indicated facility access in about 5 minutes. The margin had widened just enough to suggest likely success. As Ethan monitored the progress, an alert appeared. Presidential authorization override incoming. The facility's systems authenticated the override before accepting the secure communication. The screen displayed a stern-faced woman in her 60s wearing the uniform of a 4-star Air Force general, General Eleanor Hargrove, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Master Sergeant Hayes," she addressed him without preamble, "this is a direct presidential order. Maintain your position and ensure complete transmission of all intelligence gathered by Asset Artemis. The highest levels of government are now aware of this situation and have implemented appropriate response measures." Ethan stood straighter instinctively. "Yes, General. Transmission currently at 86% and proceeding without interruption." "Good. Be advised that legitimate security assets are inbound to your location with presidential authorization to secure both you and Asset Artemis. Previous recovery operations have been officially countermanded, and all personnel have been instructed to stand down immediately." On the monitors, Ethan could see the effect of this command rippling through the breach teams. Some operators immediately ceased activities, while others continued with increased urgency, suggesting either delayed communication or operators functioning outside legitimate command structures. "General, we have multiple teams still attempting a breach despite your stand-down order," Ethan reported. "Those individuals are now officially designated as unauthorized personnel operating in violation of direct presidential orders." Hargrove replied firmly. "Authorized response teams have been cleared to use appropriate force to ensure compliance. They will reach your location in approximately 4 minutes." The monitors showed new aircraft approaching rapidly from the southwest, unmarked but with flight characteristics suggesting specialized military assets. Their approach pattern indicated precision deployment capability, with tactical teams prepared for immediate ground insertion. "How did this reach presidential authorization?" Ethan asked. "We only activated the transmission protocol 20 minutes ago. Colonel Rivera has been operating under direct authorization from the Office of the Inspector General for the past 18 months. Operation Clean Slate was established after preliminary evidence suggested potential abuse of classified programs outside proper oversight channels. Asset Artemis was reassigned to this operation after demonstrating unique qualities during the Kazakhstan incident. This explained why Artemis had sought Ethan specifically when her mission was compromised. The enhanced canine hadn't just been following contingency protocols. She had been implementing a carefully designed accountability operation with authorization. At the highest levels, the President has been briefed directly on the preliminary findings, General Hargrove continued. The evidence indicates violation of multiple federal statutes, including illegal domestic surveillance, misappropriation of classified resources, and potential constitution of a rogue operational group within our intelligence services. This situation has been designated a direct threat to constitutional governance. The transmission progress had reached 94% completion, less than 2 minutes remaining. The unauthorized breach teams had reached the outer perimeter, but were now encountering resistance from the newly arrived authorized forces, creating a tense standoff visible on the monitors. "Transmission almost complete, General," Ethan reported. "What happens next?" "Once transmission is verified, you and Asset Artemis will be extracted by authorized personnel and transported to a secure debriefing location," Hargrove replied. "Given the sensitivity of Artemis's intelligence and your direct involvement in its security, you'll both remain under protective custody during the initial investigation phase. This isn't detention, but protection. There are individuals implicated in this evidence who have significant resources and motivation to prevent testimony." The implications were sobering but not surprising. Project Phoenix had apparently extended far beyond enhanced canine operations into areas with profound implications for democratic oversight of intelligence activities, the kind of overreach that created powerful enemies when exposed. On the surface monitors, the standoff had intensified, with unauthorized operators now actively engaging with the presidential response teams. The firefight remained contained, but indicated a level of resistance that confirmed the worst implications of Artemis's intelligence. Elements within the intelligence community willing to directly oppose presidential authority. "Transmission complete," the system announced. "All data packages successfully delivered to designated recipients. Authentication receipts confirmed from Congressional Oversight Committee, FBI Counterintelligence Division, and Office of Inspector General. Mission parameters fulfilled." Artemis moved to Ethan's side, her posture indicating readiness for whatever came next. Despite the tension surrounding their situation, the enhanced canine maintained the composed vigilance that had characterized her throughout their partnership. "Asset Artemis has performed beyond all operational parameters," General Hargrove observed. "Colonel Rivera's assessment of her capabilities has been conclusively validated. The President has authorized special dispensation for her future status, to be determined following complete review of the intelligence she has provided." This was unprecedented, suggesting potential recognition of Artemis as something beyond equipment or asset designation, acknowledging the extraordinary autonomy and judgment she had demonstrated throughout her 3-year deep cover operation. "She's earned it," Ethan stated simply, placing a hand on Artemis's shoulder. "Whatever happens next, she's proven herself to be far more than anyone anticipated when the program began." "Indeed," Hargrove agreed with surprising sentiment. "The extraction team will reach your location in approximately 90 seconds. They will authenticate using code phrase Horizon Sentinel, followed by today's date in reverse numerical order. Do not accept any other authentication, regardless of apparent authority." The communication ended as abruptly as it had begun. The unauthorized operators had been effectively contained by the presidential response teams, though scattered resistance continued. The legitimately authorized extraction team had secured a landing zone near the Thunder Basin entrance and was deploying with tactical precision that indicated elite special operations training. The facility's communication system activated with an incoming transmission. "Thunder Basin facility, this is Extraction Team Alpha, authentication code Horizon Sentinel 1103-25, requesting security protocol deactivation for authorized personnel access." Ethan verified the authentication before implementing the security override. The Thunder Basin systems required both his biometric confirmation and Artemis's specialized authorization, another layer of security that protected the facility from conventional breach attempts. "Authentication accepted," the system confirmed. "Access granted to authorized personnel only." On the monitors, Ethan watched as the extraction team, 6 operators with specialized equipment and distinctive insignia, indicating Joint Special Operations Command, entered the facility. Within minutes, they reached the secure core where Ethan and Artemis waited. establishing direct communication through the facility's internal systems. Master Sergeant Hayes, this is Major Wilson, JSOC Extraction Team Alpha. We're approaching your position with presidential authorization to secure you and Asset Artemis for immediate transport. Please confirm your status and any potential complications. Status green, Major, Ethan responded. Asset Artemis is secure, and mission objectives have been completed. No immediate threats within the facility core, but be advised that unauthorized personnel remain active on the perimeter despite presidential stand-down orders. Understood. Those elements are being contained. Our extraction route has been secured and transport is standing by. Prepare for immediate departure. 3 minutes later, Ethan and Artemis were being escorted through the Thunder Basin facility toward the extraction point, surrounded by the JSOC team's protective formation. As they reached the facility's main entrance, Major Wilson paused to provide final briefing. The extraction vehicle is positioned 20 meters from this access point. We'll move in standard protective formation with you and Asset Artemis at center. The area has been secured, but maintain full alert status until we reach the transport. Questions? What happens once we reach the secure location? Ethan asked. You'll both undergo comprehensive debriefing with representatives from the Office of the Inspector General, Congressional Oversight, and Military Intelligence, Wilson replied. Beyond that, I'm not authorized to provide specifics. My orders indicate extended protective custody will likely be required given the sensitivity of the intelligence asset Artemis has provided. The implications were clear. The evidence Artemis had gathered implicated individuals with significant power and resources, creating potential threat scenarios that would require long-term security arrangements. Ethan's quiet retirement had ended permanently the moment he'd brought the shivering dog into his barn during the blizzard. And Artemis? Ethan pressed. What happens to her after debriefing? Major Wilson hesitated before responding. My understanding is that her status is under direct presidential review. The operational assessment indicates capabilities and performance beyond standard asset classification. Colonel Rivera has submitted formal recommendation for specialized designation acknowledging her unique status. This suggested ongoing discussion about the appropriate classification for enhanced assets, demonstrating Artemis's level of autonomy and judgment. A profound question with implications extending far beyond military or intelligence. Applications. Time to move, Wilson announced. Standard protective formation on my mark. Execute. They emerged from the Thunder Basin facility into the snowy Montana landscape, now transformed by multiple aircraft, vehicles, and the unmistakable signs of tactical engagement. The extraction vehicle, a specialized transport with advanced protection systems, waited as described, its rear compartment already open to receive them with minimal exposure. The JSOC team moved with practiced efficiency, maintaining protective coverage as Ethan and Artemis crossed the short distance and entered the secure transport. Once inside, Ethan finally allowed himself to process the extraordinary sequence of events that had transformed his quiet retirement. The farm he had rebuilt after leaving his military career was now compromised, destroyed by his own hand through Thunder Basin protocols and subsequently overrun by competing intelligence factions. Yet, as he looked at Artemis, now sitting calmly beside him in the secure transport as it lifted off from the Montana wilderness, he felt no regret. The enhanced canine had completed an extraordinary mission against overwhelming odds, preserving crucial intelligence that would expose corruption and abuse within systems designed to protect American democracy. You did good, girl, he told her, quietly, as the transport accelerated away from the scene below. Whatever comes next, you've more than fulfilled your duty. Artemis met his gaze with that distinctive intelligence that had defined the fifth-generation enhanced assets, an awareness that sometimes seemed to transcend the boundaries between human and canine cognition. Her response conveyed not just acknowledgement, but something more profound, the satisfaction of a mission accomplished despite extraordinary challenges. 3 months later, Ethan sat in a comfortable but secure accommodation within a classified military installation. The debriefing process had been exhaustive, weeks of detailed interviews with investigators from multiple agencies reviewing evidence that Artemis had gathered during her 3-year covert operation. The enhanced canine had remained by his side throughout, her status now officially designated as Specialized Intelligence Asset with Autonomous Operational Capability, a unique classification created specifically to acknowledge her extraordinary role. The television played quietly, broadcasting congressional hearings that had captivated the nation for weeks. The evidence Artemis had provided had triggered the most significant intelligence community oversight investigation in decades, exposing unauthorized operations that had expanded far beyond legal parameters or constitutional boundaries. Project Phoenix had been officially terminated, its leadership facing criminal charges for misappropriation of classified resources and potential violations of laws governing intelligence activities. The broader implications for enhanced asset programs remained under review, with emerging legislation designed to establish ethical guidelines and oversight mechanisms for technologies that blurred traditional distinctions between human and artificial intelligence. Colonel Rivera entered with news. The President has made a decision regarding your future arrangements. Given the ongoing sensitivity of your situation and Artemis's unique status, you've been offered a specialized position within a newly established oversight division. The role would leverage your experience with enhanced assets while providing continued security for both of you. The offer reflected practical recognition that neither could simply return to ordinary life, given what they now represented, and the information they possessed, yet it also acknowledged the value of their experience in establishing proper protocols for future programs involving enhanced intelligence assets. We'll take the position, Ethan told Rivera after brief consideration. On one condition, Artemis's status continues to evolve based on demonstrated capabilities rather than predetermined classifications. If she's proven anything, it's that we've only begun to understand what the 5th-generation assets are truly capable of becoming. Rivera nodded agreement. That condition has already been incorporated into the presidential directive. Your first assignment begins next week, helping establish ethical guidelines and operational parameters for the next generation of enhanced intelligence assets. As Rivera departed, Ethan turned to Artemis, who had moved to the window overlooking the secured facility grounds. The enhanced canine had adapted to their new circumstances with characteristic resilience, maintaining operational readiness despite the dramatic changes to their situation. "Looks like retirement will have to wait a while longer, girl," he told her, joining her at the window. "But I think we've found a mission worth pursuing." Artemis responded with the subtle movement that Ethan had come to recognize as affirmative, the specialized communication protocol that bridged the gap between human and canine understanding. The quiet moment of connection reminded him how an act of simple kindness during a Montana blizzard had led to one of the most significant intelligence operations in recent history. Outside, snow began falling softly across the secure compound, a reminder of the blizzard that had brought them together and changed the course of their lives forever. Sometimes, Ethan reflected, the most significant turning points arrive not with dramatic fanfare, but with the simple choice to open a door during a storm and offer shelter to a stranger in need.